there. All right, Acts. Back to Paul's exciting missionary journeys, and not just exciting, but we're going to see, well, we saw a little bit in the past couple of weeks, not just exciting, but dangerous. We don't hear that much about following Jesus is dangerous. That's not an American way. That's not the American gospel. But quite frankly, especially in Paul's time, but even still today, in much of the world, it is dangerous to follow Jesus. We are really so fortunate. We're going to talk about that word fortunate tonight, actually. But we are so privileged. I should use that word maybe instead. We're privileged to be in a nation that was founded on Christian values. The only reason that we have the freedom of speech, the only reason that women were given any kind of liberty and freedom in the whole world is what we're reading about here. And that's a revolutionary thought. But I'm here to remind you that no other religion in the world, no other book dares to claim what the Bible claims, and even the accuracy of the history. All of these accounts we're reading about really happened. There's no reason to doubt it. And so the word of the Lord is living, it's powerful. Hebrews 4 lets us know. It's sharper than anything you're going to read out there, anything you're going to hear. We need this. I need this. Just to be reminded, Paul did not have it easy. In fact, quite the opposite. He was being put on trial, dragged. In fact, remember, Paul kind of interrupted the very person that was dragging him out. Hey, can I please address these people? Last week we looked at that. And it's interesting that Paul waited to pull the Roman citizenship card out. And I mentioned it may have been the last thing he wanted to do at the time. But frankly, what they were doing was wrong. All of these council members, we're going to see here in Acts chapter 23, we're going to be reminded that all of this was wrong, that they were doing to him, illegal. None of this, they were a lot like when Jesus was brought on trial. They did it at night. There's so many things that they violated in their own law. And same kind of story here with Paul. So, Acts chapter 23, verse 1, then Paul, looking earnestly at the council, he addressed the council, and we're going to learn that this council had Pharisees, Sadducees. This was what you called the Sanhedrin. Men and brethren, he continues, I have lived in all good conscience before God until this day. And then the high priest, Ananias, commanded those who stood by Paul to hit him, strike him on the mouth. Then Paul said to him, God will strike you, you whitewashed wall. Tell us how you really feel, Paul. For you sit there to judge me according to the law, and do you command me to be struck, which is breaking your law, contrary to the law? Verse 4. And those then standing by said to Paul, do you revile God's high priest? Well, then Paul said, I did not know, brethren, that he was the high priest. For it is written, you shall not speak evil of the ruler over your people. But when Paul perceived that one part were Sadducees and the other half, or part, were Pharisees, he then cried out in the council, Men and brethren, I am a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee. Concerning the hope and resurrection of the dead, I am being judged. And when he had said this, a dissension arose, or we might say a complaint, an argument, arose between the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And the whole assembly, or the congregation there, was divided. For Sadducees believed, they say, that there is no resurrection of the dead. And there's no angels, and there's no such thing as the spirit world, or spirits. But the Pharisees confessed both. They believed there was a resurrection from the dead, and they believed in angels and spirits. Then there arose a loud outcry, verse 9, and the scribes and the Pharisees, their party, arose and protested, saying, We find no evil in this man, but if a spirit or an angel has spoken to him, let us not fight against God. Kind of poking, prodding at the Sadducees there. Because they didn't believe, did they, in angels or spirits. And so, just from that statement, they're kind of, you can see this was no small dissension. Verse 10. Now when there arose a great dissension, the commander, or the chief, fearing lest Paul might be pulled to pieces by the crowd, lets you know just how violent it got, he commanded the soldiers to go down and take Paul by force from among them and bring him into the castle. But the following night, the Lord stood by Paul, and here's your highlighters, here's your underliner moment. Verse 11's so powerful. But the following night, the Lord stood by Paul and said, Be courageous. Literally. I know it says be of good cheer, but the Greek word is be courageous. Paul, for as you have testified of me, or for me, in Jerusalem, so you must also bear witness at Rome. And when it was day, some of the Jews banded together and bound themselves, took an oath, saying, that they would neither eat nor drink until they had killed Paul. Now, there were more than 40 who had formed this conspiracy. And they came to the chief priests and elders and said, we've taken an oath, under a great oath, that we will eat nothing until we have killed Paul. Now you, therefore, together with the council, suggest to the commander that he be brought down to you tomorrow, as though you were going to make further inquiries concerning Paul, concerning him. But we are ready to kill him before he comes near. So, just so happened, I love this, Paul had a sister who had a son, also known as a nephew. Paul's nephew heard of their ambush, and he went and entered the castle, and he told Paul. Then Paul called one of the centurions to him and said, Take this young man to the commander, for he has something to tell him. So he took him and he brought him to the commander and said, Paul the prisoner called me to him and asked me to bring this young man to you. He has something to say to you. Then the commander took him by the hand, went aside, and asked privately, What is it that you have to tell me? And he said, The Jews have agreed to ask that you bring Paul down to the council tomorrow, as though they were going to inquire more fully about him, but do not yield to them. For more than 40 of them lie in wait for him to kill him. Men have bound themselves by an oath that they will neither eat nor drink till they have killed Paul. And now they are ready, waiting for the promise from you. So the commander let the young man, that is Paul's nephew, depart, and commanded him to tell no one you have revealed these things to me." And he called for 2 centurions, saying, "Prepare 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen, and 200 more spearmen, and have them go to Caesarea at the 3rd hour of the night, and provide mounts to set Paul on, and bring him safely then to Felix, who is the governor." He wrote a letter in the following manner: "Claudius Lysias," you can say that however you like, "Claudius, to the most excellent governor Felix, greetings. This man was seized by the Jews and was about to be killed by them. Coming with the troops, I rescued him, having learned that he was a Roman." Story has changed a little bit if you didn't notice. He's making himself sound a little bit better than he really was. Paul had to shout that he was a Roman citizen. This guy didn't discover it in any way, or dig for it in any way. But verse 28, "When I wanted to know the reason that they accused him, I brought him there before their council, and I found out that he was accused concerning questions of their law. But he had nothing charged against him deserving of death, of chains. And when it was told me that the Jews lay in wait for the man, I sent him immediately to you, and also commanded his accusers to state before you the charges against him. Farewell. Now he's your problem." Then the soldiers, as they were commanded, took Paul and brought him by night to Antipatris the next day, and they left the horsemen to go on with him and returned to the barracks. When they came to Caesarea and had delivered the letter to the governor, they also presented Paul to the governor, that is to Felix. And when the governor had read it, the letter, he asked what province Paul was from. And when he understood that he was from Cilicia, which is Roman province, he said, "I will hear you when your accusers also have come." And he commanded him to be kept in Herod's praetorium. So here you have a very Christ-like moment. I already used that title, so I didn't go with it again. Like Jesus. Remember we talked about that. But this is a lot like earlier, when Paul's being dragged through and stoned and whipped and beaten and left for dead. It reminds us of someone else. In fact, the first couple of verses here should remind us. John chapter 18, if it's not already written in your notes. John 18, verse 19 through 24. There was another high priest who struck the greater than Paul on his face. But Jesus had the response, the perfect response. In all gentleness and all humility, in John 18, you can read it. He basically stated, "What have I done? If it is something that's deserving of getting slapped across the face, please tell me. But what have I done?" And it's just a reminder that Paul is not the standard. I hope you know that. Paul the Apostle is not the standard that we live up to. If that were the case, a lot of guys wouldn't be married. Paul said that in one of his letters. A lot of people would be a missionary if we set the standard up for Paul, the Apostle Paul. Not everyone is called to that. But we have a higher standard, don't we? We have a greater standard, Jesus Christ. But standing up for Jesus gets you put in front of senators, judges, lawyers, gets you in trouble. standing up for the freedom to just be in a church, open up a Bible, pray openly, worship openly. Just a few years ago, our brother at Calvary Chapel, San Jose, Mike McClure, went on trial as Paul, in our story here, is on trial, standing up against the government, against his city there in San Jose, so that they could have church services. And it's always refreshing to see that Paul, in this story, is just acting like Jesus. He's being treated like Jesus. And it's refreshing because it doesn't change. We follow Jesus. We're Jesus people. We're not Paul people. We're not people that follow Calvary Chapel and Chuck Smith and no, we are Jesus people. And so there's a higher standard. And this is just a reminder, because you could look at this and say, well, Paul sounds a little upset. You whitewashed too. If you think Paul sounds bad, you could read quite a bit about what Jesus said to this same group, Pharisees and Sadducees, right? He had a lot to say. You look so good, which, by the way, that whitewashed too, it should remind you of someone that dresses up real nice, looks really good on the outside. But inside, we would say today, it's like Paul, the apostle here, is calling this high priest dead bones. You're just dead bones inside. You bag of bones. And this Ananias, this high priest, he was appointed high priest by the Roman government. He served as high priest around 11 years, and it was 11 years too long. Josephus, the Jewish historian, not a Christian, not a biblical historian, if you will, but just using secular history concerning this high priest who was installed, as I mentioned, by the Roman government, Ananias, just so you get an idea of how ridiculous this high priest was, that's here commanding that his servants smack Paul the apostle on the face as Paul is just making his appeal, just kind of addressing them. Ananias was brutal, cruel. Within those 11 years, hundreds and hundreds of times, he was found, this Ananias, beating the citizens for their tithes and their offerings. Literally, with a whip, demanding that they give tithes and offerings. Ever been to that church? That's how this quote-unquote high priest served. I mean, brutal. It's beyond our imagination. How could someone be this ridiculous? And then the people around are just trying to, I guess, protect in some way, or maybe earn some kind of favor. How dare you disrespect or revile against the high priest? And Paul, I think one of the most interesting verses here, and maybe all of the book of Acts, controversial in many ways. Paul says, I didn't know that he was the high priest. Okay, wait a minute. You just got done saying you were a Pharisee. We know that Paul most likely was a part of the Sanhedrin. What do you mean you didn't know this was the high priest, Paul? There's a few different thoughts. One of them being that Paul didn't know that this was somewhat newer. This Ananias was new to being the high priest. Could be. It was just a different high priest than the time that he was a part of the sect of Pharisees. But another option that many talk about is the eye problem, EYE problem. Remember, Paul had his eyes, something happened at that road to Damascus, on that road. He got blinded, he had to be led. In fact, it was a miracle that he was able to see again. But he talks about a thorn in his flesh, and when he's writing a letter to a particular church, he even says, I get how much you guys care practically for me, so much so you pluck your own eyes out and give them to me. So apparently, and it's possible that he just couldn't see Ananias. Another commentator talks about them not taking the time to put the robes and the proper attire that the high priest would normally wear. Again, just points more out the violation of all the different rules that they're breaking, even bringing Paul the Apostle on trial here, kind of in a hurry to get him off of the other guy's hands, right? And so Claudius, to get him away from Claudius, just get him to Felix, just move him along, is kind of the idea there. But I like the third option. And that's, I believe Paul said, I didn't know he was the high priest simply because Ananias was not acting like the high priest should act. And I like that. I think it's a reminder for all of us. If it's you're perverting that whole calling, which in Old Testament was a high calling. We know that there's only one true high priest. But in our story, Ananias is so incredibly poor. A lot like Caiaphas with Jesus. This high priest was just as brutal, not acting like high priest. But notice, Paul still quotes from the Old Testament, you shall not speak evil of a ruler of your people. Can I ask, what do we think of Gavin Newsom? And you guys just read that. This is applying what the Bible says to our daily lives. My flesh doesn't like it. But there are callings. There are positions. The people will always fail. The people are always problematic. But the position, why are there officers placed there? God places them there. Romans chapter 13. Why are there presidents? Why are there governors and mayors and judges and all these officials placed in different positions? Read Romans 13. Get refreshed. It's one that your flesh always wants to skip over, if you're anything like me. But it's still true. Submit to the governing authorities. They've been placed there by God, including this Ananias, high priest. And it's a reminder. This whole chapter, I almost titled it, it's a reminder of the sovereignty of God. In other words, what is the sovereignty of God? What does that mean? The best description I've ever heard, and it's stuck with me for the rest of my life, so I'll give it to you for free. The sovereignty of God is, where does an 800-pound gorilla sit? Wherever he wants. Amen. That's the sovereignty of God. He does what he wants, when he wants, how he wants to do it. And who are you, oh man? Who am I? Oh, puny little human, to question the mind of God? What is the potter, or what is the clay, to look up at the potter and say, why did you make me like this? And we're just that dumb. The creation all groans. They all cry out. The animals, the mountains burst forth in singing. The sun comes out singing praises. And we are the only created beings. The only one in all of creation that says, I won't do it. I'm master of my own life. I'm smarter than that God that you call God. I just won't do it. And we go to our death. People go to hell with that thought. When we've been created to worship, to give Him glory. We've been created to bring Him pleasure. And when you find that to be true, you find, wow, I was miserable. The stuff I thought brought me pleasure was bringing me deeper in chains, deeper in that pit, deeper in that prison. The stuff that the world says, come on, have a party with us. Come on, just one toke, it's not going to hurt. Come on. And they just, they come out and they don't tell you, do they? Those are handcuffs. You're chained to that substance, to that thing that they're having so much fun. They don't tell you that years down the road they can't get away from it. Whether it's the casino, whether it's drinking, whether it's smoking, whatever that vice, whatever that substance, whatever that thing may be. Man, it just brings you more bondage. And it's not the only thing. Sin, pleasure, there is pleasure in sin for a season, right? But that's not the only thing that brings you into bondage. If you've studied anything about religion, the very word religion means to rebind, rebond, just come into bondage. And that's what so many religions do. They don't teach this book. They teach their formulas. They teach the traditions of men. In fact, the very people we're talking about, and the very people Paul is addressing, these Sadducees, these Pharisees, they were religious, in bondage. And Paul starts off by saying, doesn't he, I did all this in good conscience. I lived in good conscience, dragging people off to their death, out of the churches, dragging people through and putting them in prison. I did that with a good conscience, Paul would say. He had no idea at the time. He thought he was doing God's work. This tells me that the conscience alone is not enough. Remember that. Your conscience just prodding at you, it can be seared. Scripture tells us that. We can ignore it for so long that we start to think, and the enemy starts to twist what we think is right and what we say is wrong. So much so, you can explain that killing a baby in a womb is okay. That's how your conscience gets seared. Even though the conscience would be prodding it, would be telling you this is not right, this is not okay, this is not okay, it can get seared. So this tells me it's only a work of the Spirit, isn't it? In fact, Paul coming to the light, seeing Jesus Christ, the revelation of Jesus Christ, realizing he was persecuting Jesus, not the people that he thought. It was all Jesus. Acts 9, I'm sorry. We've been in the book of Acts, but it's been a while. We were refreshed on Acts chapter 9, because Paul, last chapter, gave his testimony. And he was excited because who was the audience? Jews. His favorite audience. These are the people I've been called to, right, Lord? And what is the Lord in our title of the message? Be courageous. You've done good. You've testified of me, but you're going to Rome. That had to make Paul kind of, I really want to be used for the Jews again, Lord. His heart for the Jews, right? God crushes dreams. Another one that's not popular. You're not going to hear that on your television sets, Christian television. God crushes dreams. Ask Joseph, the husband of Mary. God crushes dreams. You know why? Because our dreams are stupid. In fact, our dreams, a lot of times, come from our hearts. Jeremiah chapter 17, right? I might have said that wrong. I'm sorry if it's wrong. The heart is deceitful. It's wicked above all else. And our hearts are. I want to say Jeremiah 17:9. Let's check that out. Let's see how good. And sometimes it is 17:9. Wow. I'm just as impressed as you. Jeremiah 17:9. So you don't have to erase anything. I used to sit under a teacher at Bible college, and I started to bring a pencil because he had so many scriptures, and he was an awesome teacher and everything, but he'd give me the wrong chapter, and it'd be in my Bible, in pen. So I had to, so I got smart and I brought a pencil. Anyways, ever since then I always, wait, before you write that, I'm a little more sensitive now. I think it's Jeremiah 17:9. It is. Okay, anyways. How I get off on these topics, I can never tell you, but I get there. Our dreams get crushed, don't they? We might have thought, that's the person that I should marry. That's the person that's where I should end up living. In Italy. That's where I should be. In Hawaii. And the Lord comes along. You meet the Lord. And it changes everything about you. Ask Paul the Apostle. It wasn't just his name. Remember, he was Saul of Tarsus. He becomes Paul. But it's not just, God is not just into name changing. He changes you completely. To where stuff that you were into before, you're not into it anymore. I like there's an old gospel song called Great Change Since I've Been Born. People that I used to would hate, I don't hate no more. Lies that I used to tell, I don't tell no more. Places I used to go, I just don't go no more. It's been a great change since I've been born. Ask Paul. Paul the Apostle knew that. Here he is, people that he rolled with back in his college days. People that were there with him. These Pharisees, these Sadducees. In fact, did you catch? He just throws that in there. I'm being harassed here. The whole thing is the resurrection. And he knew. You bring that up in a group of Pharisees and Sadducees, and you're just asking for it, Paul. What are you doing here? But he says it in the statement when he brings it up. What is that? Verse 6. Paul perceived that one part was Sadducees, one part was Pharisees. He then cried out to the council, men and brethren, I am a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee, concerning the hope and resurrection of the dead, I am being judged. Now that, next to that verse, or close by, you could just put 1 Corinthians 15 in its entirety. Because the resurrection of the dead and the way that he puts the hope of the resurrection of the dead, I'm here to remind you I'm here tonight to tell you we would not be here reading the Word of God. There would be no such thing as grace. There would be no such thing as the church if it weren't for the resurrection of the dead. You can read 1 Corinthians 15. Paul hammers away at this. We would be the most pitied of all people. No heaven, none of it. That's why Resurrection Day is all year round. So you get those eggs and you put them and you start hiding them all year round. Even though it has nothing to do with anything. But if it reminds you, we do not just practice that one time. The Resurrection Day is all year round. He is risen. He is risen indeed. And so, Paul's pointing that out to this group. The very thing that you don't believe in, Sadducees. That old song, right? Sadducees were sad, you see. You can always remember that because they didn't believe that you could be raised from the dead. You'd be sad. But the Pharisees were not fair, you see. Because they were nitpicking on every little thing that Jesus did. You could see they weren't fair. Not realizing the big lumber in their eye, the beam, they're picking at a little speck. That's a Pharisee for you. Swallowing a gnat. Or swallowing a camel while they're straight out a gnat. Anyways. And swallowing gnats all along the way too. But incredible. Jesus comes to Paul because it tells us the following night, the Lord not stood necessarily, he stood with Paul, and he stood by Paul. It wasn't like the Lord showed up and just stood there. He's saying, I'm with you. I'm right here. And the Lord spoke to Paul. At a moment when we have to realize his dreams were crushed, he was most likely thinking, everything I thought you were doing through me has failed. I'm a big, fat loser. I have nothing to show for my ministry, your ministry, Lord. There's no fruit. I can't see anything happening that I thought was happening. Oh, there might be some churches that I planted along the way. I don't really know how they're doing. And everywhere I turn, there's just chains, persecutions, beatings, and now questioning. Every move I make just questioned. I'm put on trial here. Talk about not fair. Paul had every right to complain like we do, to run away like we can do. But Jesus shows up at the perfect time in Acts 23:11. And if it's not highlighted, if it's not underlined, do it now. Because this is powerful. Jesus shows up and he says exactly what Paul needs to hear in this moment. Where Paul wants to give up. He's going to fail. He thinks he's going to fail. He thinks he's failing. He's kind of just going with the flow at this point. Wherever they send me, okay, I'm going from, Claudius, now I'm going over here to Felix the cat, and we'll see. A couple of you guys are still awake. Okay, good. I can't read through this and not throw that in there. Anyway. The Lord, verse 11, shows up, stood by Paul, and said, be courageous. Be of good cheer. Be courageous. You've been my testimony. You've been my mouthpiece. You've been my hands and my feet. And Paul had been an incredible testimony for Jesus. And notice, Jesus had to remind Paul, you have testified it for me in Jerusalem, so now you must also bear witness at Rome. And he's going, wait, Lord, let's get back to Jerusalem, please. Because I've been fighting all this way, going against all my even Christian friends, even prophets that said, don't go to Jerusalem. Here I am, and this is it, Lord, really? All that build up, all that dreaming, all that, well, the prayers. And the Lord says, you're going to Rome. And you're going to Rome not the way you think. You're going to Rome. You're going to go with guards. You're going to go all the way, just kind of... There's a conspiracy against Paul that God used. And it just so happened that Paul had a nephew there. And God used Paul's nephew to keep him from being killed. Whole group of guys, more than 40 guys coming together saying, we will not eat until Paul is dead. I wonder, how long did they last? Because we know Paul didn't die yet. Not for a couple of years after this. How long did they last? That reminds me, and it should remind all of us, how we can take oaths. We can be so rash to promise the Lord, I'll never do this, I'll never do that. Remember Judges 11. If you don't, it's still fresh in my mind, because I've got 2 daughters now. But there's a guy, Jephthah. And the only reason he's there in the Bible is to teach us this lesson. You do not make rash oaths. Or just be smart. Vow, no vow. Because only one truly can keep the vows. But Jephthah, there in Judges, he's one of the fighting in the army, and he wants to take over, win the victory. And he says to the Lord, I will give to you the first thing that comes out of my house if you give us the victory. They won the victory, and for sure Jephthah thought, I'm going to see one of my big fat cows or my goats coming out of my house. I'm going to see some livestock. And what does he see? His daughter come running. I'm sure his heart sank as he made that oath to the Lord. I'm going to give you the first thing that comes out of my house, not realizing. And Jephthah's daughter remained a virgin, so much so that all the women of the town remembered her every year after year. We don't know if she died, if he really killed his own daughter, or it's not important. The whole problem is you don't say things without thinking. Right? You don't make these kinds of oaths. And that these guys were just dumb enough, like we can be. I'm not going to eat until this guy Paul is dead. Wonder how long it lasted. Anyways, small point, but I think powerful. James chapter 1, verse 19 is worth being reminded of. Be quick to listen and slow to speak. How many ears do you have? 2. 1 mouth. Some of you guys are saying, yeah, Mike, do you ever take your own advice? Yes, okay. But it's true. We're so apt to talk more. But the Lord, His way is be quick to hear, quick to listen, slow to speak. Don't make these rash decisions. I don't know if you've ever heard, oh, we're so lucky. Man, we got so lucky. You know what'll make you stand out? What'll make you holy? The word holy, by the way, just means different from the world, set apart. What really will make you stick out like a sore thumb, like the one live fish in a pool full of dead fish. You'll be the one live fish if you say to people, I don't believe in luck. Bring that back. Remember I said I was going to talk about, we're fortunate tonight. We're lucky tonight to be in America, where we're allowed to do this openly. And I get that, but we're actually privileged. We're not lucky. There's no such thing as luck. And if anything in our story you find out, Paul had a nephew, and he just so happened to be in Jerusalem at the same time Paul was getting this whole conspiracy of people plotting to kill. I'm sorry, but you can't convince me that luck had anything to do with this. In fact, it's the Jews, the rabbis to this day that say luck is not a kosher word. There is no such thing as luck or happenstance. Nothing happens just out of mere, randomness. There is a cause for his nephew being there, overhearing the plot. I mean, it goes on. Every little thing. God had a reason. Maybe when we get to heaven, we'll find this nephew. Say, what got you to Jerusalem? How'd you get there? And why were you there? And you're overhearing this whole plot concerning your Uncle Paul. Really? I want to find out this kid's story. The backstory on it, right? But God will use the strangest things, the most obscure things, to get you where you should be and away from where you think you should be. And the Lord, again, He works. Ephesians 1:11 still applies, and it still is a verse that's hard to take in at times, especially when tragedy strikes, when tragedy hits. Remember Ephesians 1:11. In Him we've obtained an inheritance, being predestined according to the purpose of Him who works all things according to the counsel of His will. It may be His will that you lose your job. It may be His will that your house burns down. That's what I mean. Tragedy hits. Ephesians 1:11 still applies, folks. We can't just take these verses when we like it, when life is going all good. Ask Paul. He's on trial. He's being dragged from here to there, beaten. And God's working all things according to the counsel of His will. Using this in the life of Claudius, using this in the life of this Governor Felix. Ultimately, he's going to make his way to King Agrippa. You want a story that grips you? Sorry, I am a dad, though. I'm allowed, I think. But really, Paul is being used much more powerfully than if he were to stay at Jerusalem, which is what he would have done. If he'd have done in his flesh, he'd have stayed there. And so God will come along. He'll crush your dream. He'll completely change you for the better. Well, I should just read my notes sometimes, huh? God may allow terrible things to take place, but it's to accomplish His will. Again, the sovereignty of God. Who am I? Who are you to question the mind of God? For some reason, God chose 470 Roman soldiers to get Paul to Caesarea. And you know that God could have got Paul to Caesarea any other way. He could have carried him by angels. But he didn't. He's doing it through his provision, through his way. I'm not sure why the Lord does what he does, when he does it, but I don't need to comprehend it. Neither do you. We simply apprehend it. We simply say, okay, Lord, you're doing what you do. Why? Because if you could comprehend God, he's not worth singing to. If you could comprehend him in all of his glory and his majesty, his incredibleness, awesomeness, you wouldn't sing to him. You wouldn't be silent before him. You wouldn't revere. You wouldn't have the reverence and fear. Aren't you glad we serve a God that's so far, far beyond us? And it's such a great reminder. The faithfulness of God. Even when I don't think that he exists, he's faithful. 2 Timothy 2:13, still worth remembering and still worth turning to because I don't want to butcher this one. 2 Timothy 2:13. If you don't know that, write it down and get to know it. 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 13, where we read, even if, and I'll say since, we are faithless, he remains faithful. He cannot deny himself. And you learn that even here in Acts chapter 23. Even if you don't believe it, even if you've left all hope, he is faithful. He is sovereign. He is still in control. Isaiah 55, 8 and 9. I know there's a few of these I'm throwing out there, but these are lifers. These are ones that just stay with you for life. Isaiah 55, verse 8 and 9. His ways are not my ways. So much higher than are his thoughts than my thoughts. So much greater. See, the problem is we think we know what's good for our lives. We think we know better. Bottom line is, his ways are not your ways. That's one of the commandments, by the way, the Big Ten. Thou shalt not make God in our what? Image. Likeness. He doesn't think like you think. It's a big problem, but we should be reminded of it. Because I'm guilty, we're all guilty of bringing God, trying to think that God is at our level. No, he's much higher, much greater. In fact, the fact that Jesus came and became a man is mind-blowing. Because he's so much greater. He's so much more. Yet, he's understood everything you could possibly go through in this life. Because he did that. There's hope. There's great cheer. Be of good cheer. Be courageous. Because Jesus said, didn't he? The last verse in the Gospel of Matthew. The last verse, didn't he? Lo, I am with you some of the time. Is that what he said? Lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. See, we say, and we read these stories and we say, wow, God, you showed up and you're standing there next to Paul. That's so awesome for Paul. But guess what? Lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. Hebrews chapter 13, another one. Oh, did I write that one down? 13:5, yes. Hebrews 13:5. I will never leave you or forsake you. Quoting the book of Joshua, of course. But that's our God. He doesn't leave us like so many have, like so many will. God is with you, and He stays with you. I love it. I've never seen someone who places their hope in God regretting it. I've never seen someone that goes after God with all their heart that says, oh man, what a mistake. You will meet a whole lot of people on their deathbed. I've been there. I've been to so many funerals and sadly, not that many weddings. I've been to and I've performed a lot more funerals than I have weddings. God looks at me and says, you're not done yet. Just keep it up. But you find people at the end of their life, none of them wish they watched more television. None of them wish that they stayed home when the worship night was happening, the night of prayer. None of them look back on their life and say, what a waste. I dragged my whole family to church. No, quite the opposite. They look and there'll be those grieving around that say, what I wasted my life doing. All this time robbed. All this time that I can't get back. But the Lord, you know what? Book of Joel. In the book of Joel, you learn the Lord restores those years that you might have thought were wasted and gone forever ago. There's no way you can get those years back. No, the Lord's into it. And He will. He'll blow your mind by restoring to you the years that the locusts ate away. That's our God. Powerful stuff, but real, like Paul. It's one reason I love these in Acts here. Following Paul on this journey is it's real. You can't make this stuff up. This is a real document. You can go and find Josephus, as I mentioned, the historian, all the information you can get on these guys. Like the governor Felix. You know that he's the only governor that became a governor and was a slave. It was because he had a brother that got him into this position of governor. But Felix, an interesting guy. Kind of a cruel guy. But started out as a slave and ends up being a governor. But there's a story behind every single one of us. As we talked last week, I think it was last week, what's your story? What's your testimony? Have you shared your testimony with anyone? Paul did it quite a bit. You read about it and everyone gets kind of rolling their eyes. Oh, here comes the road to Damascus story again. But you got to realize that was life. That was real, abundant life. All the other junk that people talked about, and even today, the junk that we will entertain others talking